Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a show where we talk about HR and the future of work. On this episode, I'll be joined by Laksh Sharma, one of our own subject matter experts at the Academy to Innovate HR, and we'll be talking about manager enablement, particularly focusing on how we as HR professionals can guide the relationship and set the right boundaries in order to equip and enable managers with credibility into the future. Let's dive in. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Laksh, welcome to the HR Dialogues.
Thank you, Dieter. It's a pleasure being here.
I'm really looking forward to this topic, right? And I think there's so much we can share today about the practicalities of how do we actually set boundaries as HR professionals, and how do we do that in a way that enhances our credibility as opposed to diminishing it. But before we jump straight in, we'd like to get to know our guests a little bit better on the HR Dialogues. Laksh, what drew you to the HR profession? What makes you passionate and makes your eyes light up when you think about HR?
It was back in 2004, and wow, it's been 20 years since I've been working now. But I started my career in the call center. And one fine day, I was in this company giving an interview. And as I was going through all the processes, I saw the recruitment team members walking around, hustling, comforting people, at the same time also trying to make sure that they close all the positions. Now, that's where I saw the recruitment team members, adding value to the business, and also at the same time giving that candidate experience. And that's when I realized, wow, that's such a great space to be in, that you're not only helping a business solve the problem, helping it grow, but also helping people get employment. That's what drew me to human resources. I in fact took a break in my career, went back to school and did my post-graduation in HR, and the rest is history.
Laksh, give us a bit of an overview of some of your key career highlights up to now, just for people to also understand your journey and what has brought you to the HR Dialogues.
Oh, sure. My most experience is with IT and consulting firms. I worked with firms like IBM, Deloitte, Fiserv, and all in hardcore HR organizations with very strong HR processes, policies, and busy HR, I would say. I've been fortunate to be an HR business partner for over a decade. I've also managed leadership development space, manager enablement, and had the fortune of leading very large teams as well. Some of the businesses that I've managed even had, say, about 10,000 employees. So I've been in that very fast-paced, never stopping HR job. And I've also been in the seat of strategizing human resources to build a new business within the organization.
I think, and definitely I like the term you use, hardcore HR. And I think in a lot of organizations, the HR positioning is crucial. And that's really the topic that we'll be diving into. And for a little bit of context, Laksh, when we were working on our HR trends for next year, one of the key things we spoke about is how do we drive HR execution in a very different way in the organization? And we engage with thousands of HR professionals around the world on a daily basis. And I hear two things from them. The first thing is they say, we know we want to do more strategic or different type of work, but we are so busy in the day-to-day, in the firefighting. And then the second piece that they mention is, how do we get the partnership with line managers to look very different than today? And a lot of people comment on the fact that they feel that they are almost having to overstep their boundaries from time to time. Line managers, can I use the word, take advantage of them in terms of pulling them in too far. And there's almost this fear that I sometimes hear around the pushing back, the setting of the boundary. What happens when people don't need me anymore from an HR point of view? So to get us started, I'd like to explore boundaries on the one side, but also credibility from an HR business partnering perspective and how we work with the business in a different way. And I think to get us started, in your view, why does HR struggle with boundaries?
Being a human resource professional, your natural instinct is to help people. So as soon as an employee or even a manager would come to an HR, the natural response is, that's an opportunity for me to help. Right? And that's where the boundaries and the lines start getting thinner, or rather very, very blurred. Because if an employee comes to the HR, HR's response is to help the employee, whereas HR may not realize that it's not them to solution a particular problem, right? They could be a people issue that only the manager can resolve, or it's a very early stage that the manager or the leadership has to solution first, and then it would come to the HR. At times, HR oversteps multiple layers, what they have created as a process, just because of that immediate instinct or that opportunity that, hey, I can help and immediately give that experience to the employee. Whereas the HR has to really sit back at times or think and introspect what's the right way to address a particular people problem or a query from an employee.
Two things that stands out for me. The first one is that I think that natural instinct to help in the moment. And somebody once made the comment to me, which I thought was very powerful, to say, make sure that the decisions and your actions today doesn't get your future self into trouble. And I think that's quite an important one, because I've been in that situation as HR where I jump in and I help, and I know there's a process and a policy that says I shouldn't, but in that moment, I almost want to engage because the leader or the manager or the employee is almost, right in front of me in the moment. So I think it is important to understand what help looks like. And very often, I think HR professionals drive a sense of learned helplessness into a business. So what that means is I don't teach people how to help themselves through the practices and the processes and the enablement, but I do it on their behalf. And if I'm honest for a moment, I think it comes a little bit from the fact also that we believe when we grow up in the HR world, you're almost celebrated for being helpful, for being efficient, for being there when people need to rely and depend on you. And I think the real work that we need to do around putting the structures in place and the boundaries are not necessarily always that celebrated, because it's also uncomfortable for leaders, right?
Very rightly said. And I feel that it also depends on your organization, the size of the organization, and also the HR model. In a lot of organizations, and especially that are, say, small in size, it's very easy for employee to just talk to the HR, and HR knows everybody. But as organizations scale up, it's very important to have the right operating model, have the right HR BP model, so that HR also has that clarity of what and when they're supposed to have a conversation with the employee or directly jump into the conclusion. Of course, we always celebrate HR being approachable. We always celebrate HR being there to quickly solution and help. But like you rightly said, HR also sets themselves for failure or a long-term getting into a problem if they just quickly start solutioning every problem. That's what happens when HR is approachable. They want to just go on the floor or go on the shop floor and start helping people. They're not realizing that a very critical layer, which is the first line manager or the people manager, that layer is not getting the enablement if HR starts solutioning every problem. That also means that HR is not giving that opportunity to managers to be the people facing person. So I've been in trouble so many times in my career because I just quickly can solution a problem. I know what to do. I have set the process and I will just close that problem, not realizing that I did not follow the process. Perhaps I didn't document it, and I can be in legal trouble as well.
The important point that I think you mentioned that really stands out for me is the concept around, yes, you have to be approachable, but approachable does not mean that you then just, you sit and you're an order taker of the wish list of things that needs to happen. I think it is important that as HR professionals, we do realize that we have to help in a sustainable way. With my teams over the years, I've always had this rule around, the first time you can watch me do it, the second time we do it together, and then the third time I watch you do it. And then from there, you should be able to run on your own with regards to that. And I think very often when dealing with line managers or first line managers, there is a similar type of thinking that you need to apply in that moment. I do want to come back to a point, Laksh, that you've mentioned earlier around the HR model and how HR is positioned in the business, because I think it is different if you are in a large-scale organization where the role of HR and what HR does is a lot more established and people have a better understanding of the value that HR brings, versus, you're in a small team of maybe 4 or 5 HR professionals. You might have come in as the first HR professional into the business. And what I found quite frequently, what happens there is then you are absolutely everything to everyone. And they almost deal with you in a sense of they try to make sense of what they think HR should be. And that is the expectation that they hold of you. For me, it highlights that we need to recontract with business around what we do and what we don't do, and be very comfortable about what value looks like, because we have to define and take ownership of that narrative.
We've been talking about boundaries, right? Now, obviously, as an HR, it's never advisable that you go to your leaders or managers saying, this is all that I can do, and this is what you need to do, right? Because HR has to always be a trusted advisor to the business. That also means that HR has to be there to help advise. Taking a few steps back, when HR is in a smaller organization, easy to approach. But when the organizations scale, that's when the operating model becomes so important. And that is where HR has to build that credibility of being there to help, enable, and make managers effective, so that not everything comes to HR for solutioning. Now, of course, as an HR, I must say you cannot tell an employee that, hey, this question is not for me. Go back and ask this to your manager. Right? So it's very important that HR understands that this is an opportunity to give a great employee experience, gives that solutioning to the employee, and at the same time also say that, hey, maybe your manager can answer this question as well. And it's very important for HR to go back and have a dialogue with the manager, saying that these are the questions, or this question has come. How can we work together? How can I help you so you can address these queries timely or in a fast way? Because an employee may have to block some time with the HR, or find where the HR is, right? Or even, send a message. Employees work with managers every single day, right? So the so the manager is the first point of contact for even people-related questions. So HR, don't send the employee back, solution the problem, but then go back and have a dialogue with the business or leader or the manager, and help them be equipped to answer those questions.
I love the idea of, helping in the moment, but almost setting the tone. And very often, I think it's the actions that you do as a follow-up that really drives the change in the longer term. It does come back a bit also to line managers understanding their role. All right, Laksh, and let's get real for a moment. If I am, and I think we fail in organizations when people step into that first level line manager role. First time I'm leading a team, I don't even know what's expected of me, regardless of, the HR professional that needs to help me as part of that. And then I sometimes almost feel it's like, people feel like they're drowning, and they reach out to whoever is able to help them, and then HR steps in. And as much as it's helpful in that moment, it's not sustainable as part of that. So I'd love your view on, how do you know you're overstepping your boundaries?
There are a couple of things. One is clarity of your role and clarity in expectations. And that's why it's very important for an HR to spend time with the business leaders or managers to truly understand what they think HR does and where they want HR to come in. One is clarity of the role. Another is the lines are blurred, as I earlier said, and it's all right for HR to cross them at times, but it's also important for HR to flag them off. It's not that HR starts working with the employees in a silo and the manager or the leadership is not aware. Now, that's when things become a problem. Even the smallest of things become a problem, because HR is not keeping the employee, or rather the leader or managers, in loop. On the flip side, on the other side totally, a larger problem that exists is when a manager or leader thinks that is an HR problem, and when HR thinks that is a business problem.
Something that you mentioned that stands out for me really is around the clarity component, right? And something that I've always tried to implement both myself and with my teams, or whenever I'm mentoring or coaching somebody, is to say, always in these conversations, make sure that people understand the hat that you're wearing or the role that you are performing in that conversation, right? And I've had various conversations with line managers where I say, what are you looking for from me? Is it you want a sounding board? Is it feedback? Is it advice? Or is it literally just you need somebody to talk to and I was available, right? And I know it sounds very pragmatic and silly to put it that way, but I think it does help quite a bit in these conversations when we say, but why are we having this conversation, and why me, and why in this moment, and why in this particular context? I think that has to fit into a broader component around trust, and that trust capital that you've built up over time with the business. I think given to HR professionals is that be the no people or the naysayers, and you don't want to create that type of impression, but you want to be very open around why am I saying no to certain things? Because I think that's the other thing we don't do is we just say, that is a business challenge for you to sort out with your line manager, but we don't tell people why we are referring them back and what they can still do in that situation. So I think that action orientation, that solution type of component is so crucially important, and just to set the tone for a different type of conversation and expectation of why am I in that particular situation.
That's very rightly said. And at the beginning of our discussion today, you said that HR is busy. Somewhere you said that, and that is so true. That HR is so busy with operations that at times they do not invest time in completing a conversation. It's
Agree.
just quick answer and move on, and that's where the problem starts. Because if HR starts referring employees back to the business without giving the context, employees may feel that is the HR just a representative of the leadership?
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as employees start thinking that way, that's where the trust is lost.
Sure.
And it's not uncommon for employees to think that way. So HR has to invest time in that dialogue or completing the conversation or give context, right? And that's where it's important for HR to go back, reduce operations, work on efficiency, so that they truly invest time in having those meaningful conversations. And again, like I said, it's very important to keep the leadership or business or the manager in the loop, because with that, they will also gain trust as an HR with the manager as well. Because as I said, the first line manager is a very important layer. They need to trust HR as well. Because if that trust is lost, the problem is bigger. The manager will not know the solution that they're giving, can that land them into trouble? And that's why a lot of times managers skip giving an answer just because of low psychological safety. That's a larger topic, but that's when they would say, don't talk to me, it's a people problem, go to the HR. It's because they feel they can be in trouble, and that happens because that trust is lost.
Can you share a couple of examples with us on how you've approached line manager enablement to set that boundary in place to make sure that there's a strong working relationship? What I'm already taking out from what you've mentioned is, make sure we close the feedback loops, make sure that there's clarity on the role, make sure that we always position ourselves and people know that we are there for the best interest of both parties, not just the leader or the manager or the organization, but actually everybody in the conversation. Laksh, can you give us some examples in your career of how you've enabled managers to step into their role?
Certainly, Dieter. There are three terms that come to my mind when we say working with managers or enabling them. One, of course, is enablement. Another is engagement, and effectiveness. So primarily, these are three E's that I always followed when it comes to working with managers and making them better managers. Being effective is literally enabling them with the right skills, which is people management skills and leadership skills. Another part of enablement is helping managers be advocates of policies, processes, and they being aware of various talent or other HR programs. Instead of HR programs, I always like saying organizational programs. And the third is engagement.
I love your idea on the three E's. And if I can build on those as well, I think what I've also found very helpful is to also utilize data to give managers insight, right? So what I mean by that is very often, I think managers are not equipped to make the right people decisions for their team because we are expecting them to make it without having sight of key pieces of information, right? So I always had this big conversation in a lot of organizations. They say, first line managers, they are not allowed to see salary data. They're not allowed to see demographic data. They're not allowed to see X, Y, Z, the list goes on. And my question always is, if you trust people enough that they have to manage and lead the workforce, why are you not trusting them with the confidential information that they need in order to be able to do that? And the decision-making that they can make certain calls around salary increases, obviously with guidance and not in isolation, but they are then at least equipped and enabled to have those type of conversations and really take ownership of that relationship. I want to also just reflect on a second point that you've mentioned around, I think sometimes we assume when people move into that first line manager, it's the first time I'm managing a team. That is actually a significant transition in any career. And there's almost these turns that people need to make around what is expected, because it's very different leading a junior team versus leading a very senior team versus leading a function versus leading the organization, right? If you think Drotter leadership pipeline type of theory there. So I think we have to really be aware of the fact that what are the lifelong developmental components that we put in place to help leaders over time, and not just throw a leadership course at them the moment that they become a first line manager and then expect everything is okay. For me, there's always a couple of questions that's so important. Does your team know what's expected of them at all times? Can they make decisions independently around what is priority? It means that you've set the tone in the right way. And the third one, to get back to your earlier point, is do you know them as human beings? Because human beings are different, and treating people in a fair and in a consistent manner does not mean you treat them exactly the same, because their needs are very different and what they want from you as a manager is very, very different. So I think as HR, if we can shift the conversation a lot more towards that, say, but what do you as a manager or leader need now with your team? How can I be helpful in that particular journey? I think it's a different conversation altogether, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I always feel that leadership and people management is a journey. First-time managers, it's literally like joining a new organization. Managers are in a very privileged position to, develop somebody, help somebody grow, give that livelihood, opportunities to people. At the same time, it's a very not very comfortable place to be in, and it's really scary. Managers are in a lot of pressure, right? Give that experience to people, give that experience to the client, manage deliverables, manage leadership. It's a very, very sandwiched layer. And what HR needs to do is it's help them. And you used a term, and empowerment came to my mind. That there is no enablement without empowerment, right? It's very important that managers are given that leeway to make decisions, right? And let me give an example to you. There is an organization I worked with where we decided that we're going to open salary ranges for employees. To anybody, it's a very scary thing, Imagine employees seeing where they sit in the salary range, right? As soon as this conversation started, everyone was really scared. Who's going to answer the questions, right? Because everyone will have a question, right? HR can't manage that scale, and HR doesn't really want to go down and start explaining, right? Now, in this organization, what we did, we invested heavily in coaching managers and telling managers how salaries are decided, how the computation works, why somebody sits in the middle of the range, or away from the range, or closer to the higher point or the lower point, in simple terms. So the organization invested heavily coaching managers for weeks. And after that, we did simulations, let managers go through different scenarios. And when the salary ranges were open for employees to see, not one single employee reached HR saying, I'm not happy with the answer I received. So empowerment came in here by managers being able to give that answer. And in the future, managers were empowered to make decisions on salary increments. So there was a system to give suggestive salary increment, but the nth empowerment lied with the manager. Of course, there was one more layer of leadership, checking whether everything makes sense or no. And that's why managers were invested in answering, because in the future, they will have the power, they will have the authority to make that decision as well. Right? Otherwise, managers would have said, I don't know, I'm just delivering the message. The decision is taken by somebody else. And, HR then faces the, that storm of
that fallout. A couple of things that stand out for me, Laksh, in terms of what we've mentioned in our conversation up to now, right, is I want to come back to the point on, I think it's important that there's clarity on your role and the role you play as HR. I think that there's trust in the relationship that you have with the line manager, and that they understand that you are there to help the broader organization, but they know what help looks like. I think it's the intent for you to enable. Love the 3 E's that you've utilized there, I think, with a focus also on how do we empower over time and make sure that that actually runs in a very practical sense and in a practical way in the organization. I want us to take a slight step back, and we started our conversation also around talking about strategic business partnering, and we've zoned in quite a bit on managers, especially first line managers. You and I have spoken about this before. I think that is the most difficult job in an organization, is like first line managers, middle management, because I think you get instructions from the top and you get complaints from the bottom, and you sometimes, as you've mentioned, squeezed in between as part of that. I want us to take a step back, and in your experience also as an HR leader and as an HR executive previously, when we think about strategic business partnership and partnering, when we do things right, what does that look like?
What I followed was working closely with managers and leaders, and business acumen is very important because knowing HR policies, processes, anybody can do, but having that business eminence as well as being able to help people, advise managers and employees, it's a perfect combination and a blend. And you can never be taken very seriously if you don't understand business. In fact, there was a time when, perhaps my first job in HR, when a manager told me that, Laksh, you can't really understand my pain because you don't understand project management. I'm a project manager. I said, wait, let me understand what is project management. And I did my PMP certification just to understand the technicalities. It's been about over 10 years now. And at least there is that understanding with managers that, hey, my HR knows what project management is. So going a step forward, I feel that HR needs to understand business. HR needs to understand the pulse of the employees. Very, very difficult, but all comes down to how much invested HR is and how much time they are spending. There's no harm in working with leaders and telling them, I want to learn what you do. Leaders love it. Leaders appreciate that.
I always teased my team to say, I will give you a coffee budget to go and spend and have coffee with leaders and ask them 3 questions. First one is, what is keeping you awake at night currently? So that gives us a very good sense of what's happening in the business as part of that. 2, what do you expect of me in terms of helping you solve these challenges and moving forward? And 3, how are we going to manage this relationship going forward? And I think it's important that that contracting conversation does happen. And to your point, also understanding who your key stakeholders are, because I think we sometimes trip up as HR professionals, and this might be an unpopular vote, but not all stakeholders have the same type of impact in a business. So you have to be careful around, how am I going to invest the limited time that I have? And then on the other side, also making sure that where you do spend your time, it is for the biggest impact in the business and the organization, and that it's a balanced view between not just fixing problems, but also enabling new capabilities for the future. Laksh, I want to start wrapping up for us, and thank you so much for sharing some of your fantastic insights. And before I ask you a last question on advice for HR professionals that is still struggling with this issue today, a couple of things maybe that stood out for me from our conversation is, I think, again, the importance of how you position yourself as an HR professional. And at AIHR, we talk about execution excellence, which talks a lot about how we influence, how we network, how we position, how we do stakeholder management. I think in the complexity in the world of work today, that becomes even more crucial for us to get right. I think the second component around go and spend time, get to know the people as human beings and what they struggle with and where they are. Understand who your stakeholders are so that you are able to spend your time at the right place and make sure that your impact and influence is really heard. Be clear on expectations. It's perfectly okay to push back against certain things and say, I will help you now, but that's not necessarily in the future what we should be doing. You should be stepping into that particular role, and how do we help you to be able to get there? So Laksh, as we wrap up, any advice for HR professionals listening today that says, I need to do something different? Where do I start tomorrow?
There are a couple of things that come to my mind, and as we wrap up, one thing is that don't over-engineer things. HR loves the word transformation, but HR forgets that they are HR at the end of the day. It's very important to still work closely with people, prioritize your work, and keep learning. A lot of HR don't invest in learning, and that's where the problem starts, because business is learning, business is moving too fast, technology is changing, HR is not investing time in learning. And be genuine. That's very important. As soon as you stop being genuinely caring, the trust factor drops, and that's when the problem really starts.
Perfect. Laksh, thank you very much. For those listening, thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the HR Dialogues. We look forward to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Dieter.